Hi, I'm Sarah Middle and I'm a PhD student at the Open University. Today I'm going to present some findings from my survey and interview research about the use of digital tools and resources for ancient world research methods. My PhD project looks at an approach called linked data, which can be used to connect digital objects that have things in common. For example, digitally bringing together archaeological objects from the same time and place, but which are now held in different collections. However, the use and implementation of linked data tools and technologies can be tricky, particularly for researchers without significant technical experience. So using the ancient world as both a subset and a microcosm of humanities disciplines, my PhD aims to explore why uptake of linked data for humanities research has so far been fairly minimal, how linked data tools and resources could be made more usable, and how they might best be integrated with existing research methods. To find out about what makes a usable resource and which methods ancient world researchers are already using, I asked the researchers themselves. The first stage of my user research was an online survey to give a broad overview of what digital tools and resources ancient world researchers are already using, the methods associated with them, and the extent to which these researchers are already familiar with linked data. I received over 200 responses and followed this up by interviewing 16 of the survey participants to explore these topics in more detail. One of the topics that all participants were asked about was which research methods they associate with their use of digital tools or resources. To ensure consistent responses that were easy to analyse, I used the established list of humanities research methods provided by TADIRA, the Taxonomy of Digital Research Activities in the Humanities. A taxonomy is a type of controlled vocabulary, so it's a list of terms used to standardise the way that particular concepts are described. And it's arranged in a hierarchical format, so you start off with a set of broad overarching terms that each can be broken down into a number of more detailed specific terms. For classifying methods, I was interested in the research activities category of TADIRA, which is divided into the subcategories of capture, creation, enrichment, analysis, interpretation, storage, and dissemination, each of which contains more specific methods. And here are the results. I've chosen to show the top 11 methods here because there's a significant difference between the number of participants who selected the 11th and the 12th most popular methods. So as you can see, the most popular method was discovering, which comprises the processes of searching and browsing to locate research materials. The next four methods, so communicating, publishing, converting, and storage, are more generic processes that could equally apply to non-research related activities. However, the next two, data recognition and annotating, are a bit more specific. So data recognition refers broadly to recognising and extracting pieces of information from a digital object. So in practice, this might mean uploading a text to a tool that automatically identifies the name of places or people, for example. Annotating includes highlighting or adding notes or comments onto a digital object, such as a text or image, as well as incorporating links to external content. Some tools actually combine data recognition and annotating by first identifying named entities like places and people in the text, and then linking them to established authority files that describe them. And that's one way of implementing linked data. And interestingly, data recognition and annotating are ranked even higher than the other more generic activities, such as teaching and collaborating. Method number 10 is visualization. So from the interviews, I found that participants visualized data in a variety of different ways, and that included maps, networks, and 3D models. And then finally, we have gathering or collating different resources together, which again, that's quite a generic activity, but I'm quite interested in exploring how ancient world researchers carry out this activity digitally and how it might be facilitated by linked data technologies. But of course, graphs like this only provide a broad indication of the situation. So I'm now going to share some of my qualitative findings based on open-ended survey questions and interviews to explore some of the issues that were encountered by participants. The first of these issues is that of trust. So can you trust that the digital tool or resource is a reliable source of evidence to support your research? Several participants were pretty sceptical about the trustworthiness of digital materials, possibly stemming from the early days of the web, where it was more difficult to distinguish authoritative sources from misinformation, although, as we all know, this issue does persist to some extent today. However, similar trust issues do also apply to physical sources of evidence, meaning that they then need to be considered critically when using them for scholarly research. And the same applies to digital publications. Participants found that considering the following aspects ensure that they did not then use these sources uncritically in their research. So who created the resource and why? So its provenance. What is and what is not included? So its scope. How is it produced? So things like what formats and data structures were used, and how is metadata being applied? So metadata is descriptive information about the resource or objects within it. Even though these descriptions are often written in objective language, they really aren't neutral. The structures and terminology used to describe digital objects can inadvertently reflect any biases held by their creator, and so it's important to be aware of this. And then finally, how do these factors affect the user's experience? So, for example, how do the descriptions and keywords used affect the search results that are then presented to the user? And this brings us to various issues relating to the process of discovering, which I identified as being the most popular method from my survey results. And the majority of these comments relate to the way in which digital resources have been described via their metadata. So sometimes resources were not specific enough in their descriptions. The participants in this example found this to be a particular problem when looking for people or person-like entities with similar names, which happens a lot in ancient Greek and Latin texts. So what's needed here is some level of disambiguation between all the different people who might appear in search results. In other cases, keywords used to describe digital objects were inconsistent. This happened quite a lot between different resources, but occasionally also within the same resource. Elsewhere, there were errors that had taken place during data input, which one participant noticed had caused significant omissions in the search results that they were presented with. And then, once you've got your search results, there's the issue of quality. One participant noted that there's a lot of interest in digitising more and more material, and it can be a lot easier to secure funding for producing a new resource and improving an existing one. But particularly in the humanities, it's quite common for digital resources to be abandoned after their publication, sometimes still containing errors that should have been fixed beforehand, and their content may then go out of date over time. So in many cases, enhancing and maintaining existing resources might be more effective than producing new ones. Another issue that particularly affects humanities resources is the representation of uncertainty. So as we all know, humanities research is all about making interpretations or assertions based on the available evidence. For example, in archaeology, it can be impossible to establish the exact date when an object was created or deposited. So instead, an interpretation that's been made based on its surrounding context, so the items it was found with, which is then often updated as new evidence is discovered. However, in the digital world, it can be very easy to make these interpretations look like facts, and that could potentially be very misleading, particularly if the information is out of date. There currently isn't a standardised way of presenting this kind of uncertainty in the metadata about digital objects, and one of the participants in my research suggested that this would be helpful. Another participant took a more pragmatic approach in that the user will always be required to perform further work themselves for their specific purposes to enhance the data set for their needs, rather than expecting to immediately be able to use the results that they receive from the system. So to conclude, I found that discovering was the most popular digital research method among the ancient world researchers who answered my survey. And I also identified data recognition, annotating, visualization and gathering as being potentially interesting research methods to explore further during the interviews. Looking at the more detailed responses during the interview discussions, I further identified the interlinked factors of trust, discovery and quality as being key to effective interaction with digital tools and resources for research in the humanities in general and the ancient world in particular. More specifically, participants communicated the importance of approaching digital tools and resources with the same critical perspective as when using physical source material, paying attention to the information about how a digital resource was created, and being prepared to address gaps and inaccuracies after retrieving any results. Thank you.